Okay.
I guess we now have other folks joining us. There we go.
Okay, that shows it red. But that means it's hot. Yes.
I'm here. I'm here.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to July's PPRTA meeting, and look forward to some really good discussion this afternoon. I'm gonna, at this time, call to order.
Thank you.
And we need to call the roll and establish a quorum.
Working out.
Who's got the roster to call the roll? All right, thank you. Looks like we have a good turnout this afternoon.
Okay, I'll just go through the head count real quick and name off everybody that I've marked off. And if I miss you, let me know when I wrap up and we'll make sure you have your quorum. And I'll confirm with Rick. So I've seen Director Holly Williams, Director Gonzalez, Director Graham, Director Helms, Chair Helms, Director Williams online, Wayne Williams, Director Carpenter here with us in the room, Rick, Bev, Andy, Miss Jennifer Ivy. Who else have I missed as far as board members? Anybody out there?
Director Geithner.
Director, yeah, yeah, Geithner. Thank you. I don't see her.
So we have a quorum.
We have a quorum, so if you guys will just remember to state your names and making motions, it helps us capture it for the meeting minutes on both sides. And if you are out in Zoom land, if you're not speaking, if you can go ahead and mute your mic. Thank you. Oh, and a quick note, if you need to turn on your microphone, it's the face with the, it looks like it's talking. That's how you run your microphones in the room.
All right, first order of business is I call for a motion to approve the agenda.
This Wayne, so moved.
Do I get a second?
Second, John Graham.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, state aye.
Aye.
All opposed, state no. I hear none. The agenda is approved. All right, next part is public comment for items not on the agenda. And do we have anybody first of all, out in the audience, any public out in our audience today with us? I see none. How about online? Do we show anybody online? Nope, don't see any. All right, so we have no one. We'll move to item number 4. We are going to approve the minutes from our June 2021 meeting. Do I hear a motion to approve the minutes from our last meeting?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, state aye.
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 All opposed, state no. There is none. So item number 4, our minutes are approved. Item number 5. And we will get Mr. Godfrey up. Yep. You're up, sir, with our Citizens Advisory Committee report.
Good afternoon, members of the board. This is Jim Godfrey. I'm chair of the CAC. Hold on. Jim Godfrey, chair of the CAC. Good afternoon. Nice
Good
to see you.
afternoon.
So our meeting last week, no public comments. The city submitted list of contracts for 6 contracts. Good discussion on a couple of them and good answers by the staff. I just say that the staff continues to provide the details that we need when we get into some of these discussions about things. And that I'll just say that for the CAC, we certainly appreciate that. So on behalf of the staff, thank you for the information. It helps us formulate a good recommendation to you guys here on the board. So I appreciate that. We did have one contract that got into a discussion. You'll notice in the memo, there was a 12-2 vote. Had to do with a sole source contract on Mark Shuffle Road to Wilson and Company. And Gail did a great job of providing us information of why they made that decision. There were just a couple people that were hard over on that. So nothing major on any of that. So El Paso County came in with a line item transfer for West Colorado Avenue to help finish up that contract. And some people may see it as this is a West Colorado action plan. Is that the WEP? Is that the WEP? Yes. And so we approve that and make a recommendation to you for that. And the county contracts, I had 4 contracts and we recommend approval of those as well. And the city of Manitou Springs came in with a paving contract and we recommend approval of that as well. Other than that, it was this one was a fairly benign meeting. Except any questions?
All right, any questions from out there in Teams land? I
All right.
see no raised hands. Help me on, if you see someone with a raised hand, sometimes I can't quite see that on there. Let me know. All right, anybody else? Thank you. All right, let's see. So we need to accept the Citizens Advisory Committee report. I'll call for a motion to accept.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
All right, thank you, Mayor. And so we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no. I hear none. We accepted the Citizens Advisory Report, Committee report. All right, our next up is financial reports with Ms. Bev.
Good afternoon,
Good afternoon.
PPRTA board members. So we had another great month. May's sales and use taxes were 11,898,000, which was 2,387,000 above the monthly budget, or 25.1%. So right now, we are above the amended budget by 11 million, almost 660,000. And that's on page 1. And then on page 2, we compare to last year's actual. And for the month, we were ahead of last May's actual by 2.1 million, or 21.5%. The other pages to the report are the revenue and expense summary. And does anyone have any questions?
Any discussion or questions? All right, I see none.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is item 7. The 2021 capital maintenance and public transportation contracts. City of Colorado Springs first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Gail Sturdivant, City Engineer
you,
and
Gail.
Deputy Public Works Director. The City of Colorado Springs is bringing 6 contracts forward, as Mr. Godfrey mentioned. I'll walk through each of those. The first one is the Las Vegas and Royal UP crossing relocation. The change order we're bringing today is a dollar amount of $38,752. This is going to be for additional design services that have resulted from an executive agreement with utilities and some railroad requirements, plus some property owner negotiations there in the Royer area. I also want to point out in the memo we provided, it's got a more detailed history on what you've seen in change orders in the past, and we're going to continue to try to provide that for the CAC and the board so you can understand how projects have evolved and how costs and change in scope has evolved over time. I will mention this, although I'm not anticipating another financial change order at this time, we may have some period performance changes coming up as we have still having some challenges with one of our railroad partners on this project. You'll see in the quarterly report that we were initially intending to have this project go to construction this year, and now in best case, it looks like the beginning of next year would be our most opportune time. So just wanted to give you a heads up on that to see that.
Thank
coming.
you.
The second contract the city is bringing is the Circle Drive Bridges. This is for an amount of $159,046 to HDR, who's our consultant for that. If those of you who are on the board in April may recall that we presented an informational memo just to let you know that one of our railroad partners have come up with some additional requirements after we're at the 90% design, and we have gone through a design acceptance process and variance process with the railroad to understand what that scope is. So we're confident we'll be able to move forward to complete that work at this time. The third contract we're bringing is for the Black Forest Road widening. This particular contract focuses on some additional design work that's required or triggered by the stormwater regulations within the city of Colorado Springs for the tributary that's touched by that road project. This particular project actually kicks off that alternative analysis so we can further understand what our requirements are going to be for that. The total contract value right now, or change order value, is $125,005. And currently that is going to be split between PPRTA and the Stormwater Enterprise with the city. I will let you know, you will likely be seeing another change order in the next month or two. One is we will understand more about what the stormwater impacts are going to be. And then we've had some new requirements that have come up requests with our utility partners that we're actually going to be asking for some cost sharing on that, but you will likely see some change orders coming on that project
Okay.
in the future as well.
I did have one question on that. So it looks
Yes,
like
sir.
it's just, you're just widening Black Forest Road from Woodman up to Research and then not north of there.
That is correct. If you go back and look at the PPRTA A-list projects, the termini that were listed, that is enlisted in the ballot is from Woodman to Research.
Got it. Okay.
As part of that project, as they kicked it out, they have done a concept plan up to Old Ranch Road. We are working on what future annexation would look like for the city, extending north from Research up to Old Ranch Road, that not being paid for by PPRTA, but it's something that will likely be coming along as in parallel with the project over time.
Okay. You're reading my mind on that. Thank you.
The city's fourth contract is for the annual maintenance fee for the web-based project management software that's been used by PPRTA. That annual cost for the city's portion of that is $28,343. The reason why I don't have a particular project listed is that cost actually gets split up between the active projects that it's used on for this coming year. The fifth contract is for the Mark Shuffle Road widening from North Carefree to Dublin. As we discussed in the budget process, and it's also highlighted in this memo, the reason why we're bringing this forward, as you recall, this was part of a PPRTA 1 A-list project that at the time basically expended the funds that were available at the time. But what we're seeing out there, and I think if those have driven out there, that there's a systemic safety, congestion, operation, and capacity issues along the corridor. And if you want more specifics on that, I'd be happy to discuss that. But we're really recognizing the need to advance that design and further it so we can have the opportunity to apply construction dollars either in part or in whole as they become available for that particular project.
Yeah, I was going to comment on that one too. Yesterday in our city council meeting, Mark Shuffle was discussed at length. Director Avila and Director Williams and I, there were several comments made about the need, as you just, Gail, you just said, the need to make sure we do that.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I will mention outside of this particular contract, that even though we're looking at the bigger picture for the longer term expansion, the city does have some smaller interim projects that we can go through and do and help relieve some of the capacity and safety issues are. But really to realize the full benefit of the transportation project, we'll need to complete this design and get construction funding sometime in the near future.
Thank you.
I will mention, so as Mr. Godfrey pointed out, this was the one contract that, or a contract that we did do a sole source selection based on the work that Wilson and Company did for the county back when they managed this work, and they had advanced the project to a 90% design. The city wants to springboard upon their efforts and to get this to completion. So really leveraging the RTA dollars that have already been spent and then continue to provide some funds as need be to make that design come to fruition so we can get it ready for construction. I will mention just over the $1.236 million contract, you can see in this particular contract, right now we've identified 3 funding sources. So as I mentioned, when we did the budget amendment, I believe that was in May, we have $250,000 in the intersection improvements phase 1 program. We have in the roadway safety and traffic operations phase 1 program. In the budget piece, we added $750,000 for the purpose identified for Mark Shuffle. We would be adding some funds there, at least initially. And then right now they're in the RTA 1 bucket of money related to Mark Shuffle Road.
Mhm.
There's currently just under $29,000 available. I do want to point out 2 things that will hopefully help this project over time. One is both the city and the county still have projects along Mark Shuffle Road that have this money kind of tied up, or some of this money tied up contractually. The city is actually anticipated doing a change order as we close out the Sand Creek Bridge project, that another approximately $80,000 will become available, and we would take that and essentially apply this to the project and free up the funding back from that roadway safety and traffic operations program. And the county is wrapping up a couple of projects as well as contracts that come out, and there's RTA 1 dollars available that could be applied back to Mark Shuffle Road. The other thing that's out there, if those of you who are around the RTA1 formation or have looked at the history, and I think I've hit it in the memo, that when this project was first envisioned, that there was anticipated to be a lot of developer contribution and participation in this project over time. There has been both from a financial standpoint and construction in the past, but we still have this significant gap in the road. As development comes online, we have some developer dollars already identified that can be transferred into RTA, and others we're anticipating come online. So we see more money coming in to be available for this project. Doesn't necessarily help us get over the hump to what we need for dollars for construction, but it is going to help significantly to start advancing the project. The last thing I'll mention, the scope of what we've written is to complete the final design and actually the property, the right-of-way acquisition we would need. So once we could get construction dollars identified, our intent is to be as close as possible to be able to turn in dirt on this project as possible. And then the city's sixth contract we're bringing forward is actually a new contract. Was for the South Cheyenne Canyon Road Bridge Road 1 over Cheyenne Canyon Bridge replacement. This was one of the 4 remaining PPRTA A-list projects that the city had that had not started to date. The city has selected Jacobs Engineering to complete this work. This initial contract is for the preliminary engineering and environmental scope. We're very confident Jacob is our right selection for this. They've actually helped us with the 3 bridges the city has, but the non-PPRTA contract for North Cheyenne Canyon that is currently out to bid. They have a lot of advantageous connections with the park and the partners up in that area and knowledge in this corridor. So with that, I'm available for questions, and ultimately the city would ask for the board's approval of these 6 contracts.
Thank you so much, Gail. Do we want to go to any questions first before I ask for a motion?
I do have a question, if I could. Mr.
Yes,
President
Director
Swain.
Williams.
Thanks. Gail, if you can so this is perhaps a poster child for a mixed county city issue. You had the RTA1 project that was in the county, and now the city is taking some lead. Can you kind of describe where we are on the transfer of ownership?
I will do my best, Mr. Williams. The legal descriptions and the documents are in process to do a transfer. So this entire stretch of Mark Shelfer Road would be in the city. Right now, it has joint jurisdiction along the entire roadway. We are, regardless of who owns it, the city and county are going to continue to work together to bring this project to fruition. And I think as we go through that IGA, bringing that into the city's jurisdiction, I think we're still going to continue to cooperate now, and we're going to have to in the future for construction jointly funding that construction project. Did that answer your question, Mr. Williams?
It does, and thank you. I know that this was one of the roads that we've discussed in one of our joint city-county meetings, and I very much appreciate the advancement of this. And I think given the unique circumstances where Wilson and Company has already designed a significant portion of the roadway, that it makes incredible sense to use one of those exceptions to do the sole source contract. And so I do move approval of the city contracts.
Okay, thank you.
I will
Correct.
second that.
Oh, okay, great. That's right. All right, so we've had a motion to approve the 6 contracts. We've had a second. I'll open it up for further discussion since we've had the motion in the second. Anyone? I see no hands. No one on, I don't see anyone online with any questions. All right, I'll bring it to a vote. We'll do a voice vote again. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, say no. I hear none. The 6 contracts have been approved. All right, our next is El Paso County.
Sorry. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Board of Directors, Jennifer Irvin, County Engineer.
Yes, Jennifer.
And I just wanted to mention that During item 7B, which is our line item transfer request and our West Colorado Avenue budget increase request, I will be talking to two of the contracts that are actually in item 7C. So I just wanted to mention that. So hopefully as we go into 7C, I can really talk to the other two contracts afterwards. Obviously, typically, you know, you bifurcate that vote, which is fine. But I just wanted to mention the fact that I will talk to those contracts because they are directly related to item 7B.
So
with
do we,
that-
yeah, let me, Jennifer, if I'm right, do we want to vote, approve them separately, or do we want to?
I think so. I just
Okay.
wanted to mention so that everybody was
Got
aware that I'm kind of going to talk to two items that are in 7C.
Roger.
So again, good afternoon. Today we, as the project team, are requesting an increase of the project budget by West Colorado Avenue for $420,000. We are also requesting to fund that a line item transfer from our Eastonville Road project to West Colorado Avenue. I would mention as far as that line item transfer, we are still in the design phase of Eastonville. So we anticipate, you know, with future budgets that we would go ahead and backfill that, but it won't affect the timing of that Eastonville project at this point. So I just wanted to make sure that the board understood that. This $420,000 is really to fund two contract amendments to close out finally Colorado Avenue project. We had, as we're closing out the project and it was substantially complete, we had a nice not groundbreaking, a ribbon cutting meeting. But we're continuing to close out the project and working on some final items. And so as we came to that, we have itemized some finals, overs and unders for the project and final closeout that the design contract needs to support. So we're asking for a contract amendment with Wildcat Construction for, and this is to fund some final potholing for utilities. As we know, we have some new requirements for utility undergrounding related to some Colorado state statutes that changed. And then also landscaping. We had some additional signage repairs that were needed for a property owner who was impacted at the Buffalo Lodge, some additional traffic control, and some final unexpected electric connections that were made with some of the businesses down there. The other contract amendment that this budget item would support is a $113,000 contract amendment with FHU, which is the design consultant. And that would be to fund, you know, the final right-of-way plans, which we are required by state statute to go ahead and deposit with the state. We had over 100 property acquisitions, so we have to put in new pins for those areas that we acquired property. Final right-of-way monumentation. And then there's still ongoing litigation in regards to a condemnation parcel that within the city of Colorado Springs that is going on. And so we added some fund in there in anticipation of continuing to fund that to the end and closing. So with that, I'd ask for your approval for the budget line item transfer and budget increase. And also happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you very much, Jennifer. So yes, Director Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my comment, and I just always do this on this project, because I want to make sure that when we do PPRTA 3, that we have realistic data. So when this was originally approved by PPRTA, this was a $12 million project. 2018, we were given at the time, considered a realistic budget of $31 million, and we're at $44 million. So what I ask is that we start, as we're continuing to work on PPRTA 3, that we have the best data available so that we can provide that best data available to our residents and when we make our recommendations, because these are the kind of examples we do not want to follow in terms of underestimating cost, and has been a concern of mine for a couple of years.
Thank you very much, Director Gonzalez. I concur with you. Any other discussion? Okay. I ask for a motion to do two things, to transfer and increase on this particular item. Do I have a motion?
Commissioner Williams, I would move to transfer and increase.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Commissioner Geithner, I'll second.
Thank you, Commissioner. We have a motion and a second. Open the floor for additional discussion. Okay, and I don't see any online and none in the room. Okay, I will. Oh, you are, go ahead, Director Williams.
Thanks. I do agree that one of the things we need to do, and we have been working on for Pikes Peak RTA 3, is to have better estimates, and part of it's also to make sure we're ready for a project before we start it. So those that we can better and we will better support the motion, but it illustrates why those estimates done in a little.
Okay, you have been cut out, so I will assume you have finished. Yes, Madam Vice Chair.
Yeah, I just wanted to congratulate the team on this. We just came back from the NACO trip in Washington, DC, and this was one of the projects. It didn't win the top award, but that's okay. It was listed as an award for El Paso County, and this was quite the challenging project, so we're really proud of it.
Thank you. Okay, with that said, we will go for a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no. There are none?
Nay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, that's right. We do have a, I won't repeat that. So the motion passes with a 7-1 vote with Commissioner Gonzalez in the no vote. All right. Thank you. Okay, Ms. Jennifer, up next.
Item number
7C.
7C is our regular contracts. We have 4. As I mentioned earlier, I spoke to 2 of those already. So the first one is our Mclaughlin Old Meridian Roundabout project. And that one, we're asking for a small contract amendment with Transportation Resource Solutions, who is our property acquisition specialist on that project. We had two additional property acquisitions that we needed at the end of the project. As we coordinated and tied into the intersection of Rolling Thunder and Meridian out in the Falcon area, we added some push buttons at that intersection and signals, kind of a tie-in and to meet our new ADA requirements. So, and then also some restoration costs on one of the properties that we had impacted. So we needed the property acquisition specialist to be able to do that. So that is for approximately $15,000. As I mentioned, I already talked to the West Colorado Avenue contracts. And then our final and 4th contract is our annual 2021 crack seal contract. And this is a contract for approximately $340,000 with American Pavement Solutions. This is a new contract for 2021 with an initial contract for 1 year and an additional option for 4 years, which we can either negotiate on or go with another vendor if we don't feel like we have good negotiations. So with that, we'd ask for approval and happy to answer any questions.
All right, and I see we have Councilmember Avila.
Jennifer, on the contract that's, I think it's the 3rd one where you're going to have push buttons for the traffic. Are you in any way going to have any voice recognition? Because I can stand at a traffic light for 3 revolutions until I feel like it's safe to cross. Is there anything like that?
I will verify with my staff that that is the case, but I believe so. Our new county requirements require the voice recognition. And if I remember correctly, we actually reviewed what it would say at that intersection. So I can make sure and get back with you and verify, but that's our new criteria that we adopted for ADA in June or July of last year.
Awesome. I wish the city would do that. Thank you.
I agree with you. I wish the city would do that. Any other questions? Okay, I ask for a motion to approve the county's.
Move to approve.
Do I hear a second?
Second, John Graham.
All right, a second. We have a motion and a second. All in favor, state aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no. I hear none. The motion has passed. Thank you very much. All right, we move on to Manitou Springs. Mr. Mayor.
Hey, good afternoon. This is Jeff Jones, the Public Works Director. How are you?
Oh, Jeff, good afternoon. Sorry about that. Did I?
That's okay. I had my camera off until it was my turn to get up there, so I wouldn't cause any congestion there. Today, sir, we are bringing forth one effort, and that is regarding the approval for use of $357,848 for out of the maintenance funds for the curb-to-curb paving in our Mountain View Clarksley Road area. And this is following a $1.1 million sewer and water pipe replacement in that area, very large project. And this is in our Crystal Hills, Crystal Park area in between those two roads, that corridor. After the installation of the sewer lines and the water lines, it was deemed by our city engineer that the paved back patching, which was just going to be approximately 3 to 5 feet on each side of the cutout for the replacement, was not going to be sufficient due to the condition of the road is dilapidated condition. So we are confident that this effort now will drastically improve the road conditions in the corridor in the area. And these roads are extremely wide. Some places they're 33 feet wide, very long road. And we feel it's a very good use of PPRTA maintenance money after we've improved our infrastructure. And we ask concurrence for approval for this paving. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you so much, Jeff.
Yes, sir.
Questions either from online or in the room? I hear none. I ask for a motion to approve the Manitou Springs contract.
I move approval, John Graham.
Second, Holly Williams.
All right, thank you, Madam Vice Chair and Mayor. And with that, further discussion? There is none. Call for a vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 All
Aye.
opposed, say no. I hear none. The motion is approved. Thank you so much. All right, we're on to, wow, we're already down to item number 8. City of Colorado Springs Transit Services Monthly Update. I think Aaron?
I am here.
Nope. There you are.
I think this microphone is on.
Yes, it is. I hear it.
Great. Good afternoon, honorable board members. I'm Craig Blewett, Transit Services Manager with the City of Colorado Springs. Our report is in your packet. I'd just like to go over a couple highlights, if I may.
Yes.
On our local bus route service, we continue to stage a comeback, I guess, in terms of ridership from the pandemic. We're currently at 54% of COVID levels, or we were for the month of May. Just learned yesterday that the national average is 50% return back from pre-COVID conditions. So we're doing a little bit better than the national average. On the ADA paratransit service, our Metro Mobility service, we're at 59% of pre-COVID levels. So it's coming back a little quicker. And again, mostly tied to the return of day programs, adult day programs. The Vanpool program, it's still struggling. And so a few extra comments on that, and we've noticed that it's struggling. So we are launching a Vanpool marketing program for the rest of this year. You know, it's a lot of folks who commute to Denver, and teleworking, telecommuting is still taking place. And so there isn't quite as much ridership as there was before, but that's starting to come back. Also note that, you know, most of the Vanpool riders do have access to a car, so it's really a choice. And so when they do return to jobs, some of them continue riding cars rather than share a vehicle with other folks. But part of our Vanpool marketing program, we're contacting all prior users, social media campaign, and also working closely with major employers. You know, Metro Rides, it's a Vanpool. Yes. I have a question.
Oh, sorry, I was looking. Yes.
I have a question. Before I forget, on the Vanpool, will you tell me exactly how that works? Because I don't know how that works. So when we say Vanpool, it's like, okay, but how does that work exactly?
Okay,
How do
so
I get on a Vanpool?
just contact us. So of the services we provide, fixed route and ADA paratransit, we contract out. It's actually operated by
What
others.
number then?
Call 385-RIDE.
Okay.
Would definitely get you in contact with our Vanpool program. So I was just going to say that, you know, Vanpool is one program we actually operate. And we own the vans, and it's funded in part by the PPACG CMAQ program, Congestion Mitigation Air Quality.
I want to know, like, if I want to take a van here from my home to, I don't know, the Denver Tech Center,
Mhm.
how would that happen?
So we have a list of folks who are interested in being part of a Vanpool, and they tell us where they're starting their trip, where they're ending their trip, what days they travel, what hours they travel. And we work then with them and negotiate. And sometimes it is a matter of being picked up at your house. Sometimes it's a matter of driving to a pickup point and then traveling from there. So we do have a number of folks that go to the Denver Tech Center, a number of folks who go to downtown Denver as well. So it is subsidized by the CMAQ program, but our riders do pay some over 60% of the cost of the Vanpool. And we have a minimum of 5 people per van. And once we reach that level, we can go. We are willing to go for a short period of time with fewer, but it is a federal requirement in terms of the tax advantages that Vanpoolers have, that there be at least 5 passengers in that vehicle. So, and you know, Metro Rides is both Vanpool and carpool matching. So with Vanpool, the folks ride in our vehicles, the ones that we own and maintain. We also do carpool matching, and that's online, and you can say, you know, what day you're leaving, what time you're leaving. So it might suit a commuter, like the Vanpool program is oriented towards. The Vanpool is really oriented to people who take the same trip multiple days a week. A carpool matching could be commuters like that, or it could be just individuals going up to a baseball game, to a Rockies game, for example, and want to share a ride, and they can either offer to be the driver or the rider. In terms of helping to pay for gas and so forth is all private matter. We really don't know whether those carpool matches occur, which is a bit of a bummer, so we don't know how well that's working. But they don't have to report back to us. They can if they'd like, but our job is to match people up, and then they can take it from there on the carpool program. Then it's going to be, we're on the poise of really
How is that
stage
advertised?
takeoff.
How is that advertised?
The our Vanpool and
Vanpool.
carpool. So standard, you know, the vehicles themselves have that information. So other people who are driving on I-25 will see our Metro Rides vehicles that say Vanpool on it, and it has the contact information to call. We also have done other promotions. What we're doing as part of our marketing program, we will be talking to major employers and so forth to further engage. You know, it's going to become even more attractive once you have the managed lane open on I-25 up to Denver. That managed lane, you either pay to drive in that lane, or if you're a high occupancy vehicle with 3 or more occupants, you can ride for free. So we think there's really going to be an advantage for people who are carpooling and vanpooling to get in that managed lane and go quicker. So once that's open, we expect to get a lot more customers, a lot more interest in the program. And it's also going to play an important role as we go forward in terms of air quality and meeting air quality requirements and greenhouse gas requirements.
I think we have another question from.
Thank you. Are there set hours for the Vanpool?
No, they can run 7 days a year and whatever hours, we just need 5 passengers in their van.
So 7 days a week, 24 hours a day.
Yes, potentially, but you need to have 4 of the people who are on that schedule.
Okay, got it.
And typically the vans can stay overnight at someone's house, can be kept at one of our park and rides. Now the driver can ride for free, but they have responsibilities to bring the van in for maintenance and make sure that van is filled with fuel. Last comment is on our 2021 fall service changes. And we've completed our public process on those proposed changes. I've mentioned those before at previous meetings. We will have a final announcement of our final changes towards the end of the month. And that's all I had in my report, and happy to answer any additional questions.
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Thank you. I understand that there's issues with drivers, and this is an issue in terms of not having enough drivers, bus drivers.
Yes.
So where are we on that?
So we are short drivers. Our contractor is short drivers to provide all the service they're contracted to provide. I should say that the contractors only get paid for the service they provide. They don't get paid for the service they don't provide. They are struggling to recruit additional drivers. This is a nationwide problem in the transit agencies, in transit industry. It's also a problem in trucking industry and others similar. So we are working very closely with our contractor to meet the requirements of our contract. They have prepared a plan to meet the needed number of drivers by the end of September, in time for this fall service change.
So if you could give a percentage, like how many, what percent of drivers are we down?
So normally
Ballpark.
we need about 100 and 125, and we're down about 20 right now.
Okay.
But we also have a graduating academy. You know, it takes 4 to 6 weeks to go through a training program to become a driver. We have a number of recruits who are graduating this next week. We expect to have some 10 additional drivers in the next several weeks. So we're going to get about halfway back.
Okay, when's the next academy?
Yeah, it's my question.
So they're ongoing, and we no longer wait to have everyone at once. For one reason, from a COVID standpoint, the smaller groups we have, the less likely they are to infect each other. So they have a rolling academy at this point.
Okay, I'm not sure what that looks like, but
Well, we don't wait for everyone to graduate and then start a new one.
so you'll do like 2 people at a time, train 2 people. at a
I
time.
think the current one that just started was 3.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Any other comments or questions for Craig? Thank you very much.
You bet. And maybe just additional comment, I guess, on the drivers. It is a nationwide problem. As I mentioned, I was on a nationwide call of transit CEOs yesterday. There were 50 online, and just about everyone said they had driver shortage problems. So it is a big problem for everyone.
I assume there's a starting pay and then time depending on their qualifications.
$17.51, yes.
Okay. All right.
As a starting pay, and that's also the training pay was $12 and some, and the contractor increased that at $17.51 when you go through the training program. Any changes beyond that would require opening up the collective bargaining agreement with the union.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, now we're moving into the what I would call the interesting one today that we are going to spend quite a bit of time on over the next several months. PPRTA, the third matrix, and I guess Rick, you want to lead that off, or who we?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The board has previously indicated its preference for going back to the voters in November of 22, about a year and a half from now, for what we're calling PPRTA 3, which is the 55% of the revenue of the 1% revenue, which is for capital. Over the past several months, board members and staff members have notified me of issues relative to the PPRTA 3 proposed ballot, and I've assembled a list that we're now calling a matrix of 16 items that have A, B, C, D, and F subsections for discussion. It's hoped that the board could begin the discussion of this and maybe resolve this list over the next 2 or 3 months, not necessarily anticipated that it be resolved today, although that's certainly the board's option if you wish. And then several months ago, I think it was last November, December, the board decided to refer the list to the collective member government staffs led by Gail Sturdivant and Jennifer Irvin for them to get into the weeds on the details of these 16 items. The collective member government staffs, again led by Gail and Jennifer, gave their proposal on each of the 16 items to the CAC at the June meeting, May and June, and the CAC finished up its recommendations on the 16 items at their June meeting. So it's now referred to the board. I have put in the packet a summary that might help in the discussion. But I think since Gail and Jennifer spent the most amount of time on this, it's appropriate for Gail and Jennifer to walk through this 16 items and present their recommendations. In a couple of cases, the PPRTA CAC had alternative recommendation, a different recommendation than the Gail and Jennifer's team. So I think Gail will cover that. So it's just as much detail or summary as you wish over the next 1, 2, or 3 months, starting now, Gail.
Thank you. Well, Gail, just real quick, and Jennifer, just real quick for the board members. As we go through this, let's tear the Band-Aid off of this and try to get to it. I do not anticipate us voting today to approve Matrix 3. I just don't see that. I see us as we kind of as Rick has laid it out. Let's pull these apart and try to work on them and not jump to being able to approve them today, unless you, the board members, have a different thought process on that. So with that, Gail and Jennifer, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Gail Servant, City of Colorado Springs. As Rick mentioned, there were the 16 topics that were referred to staff. Of those 16, staff provided recommendations on 11 of those. A reason why we didn't touch those other 5 topics, that one, the board had already made a decision on a couple of them, or there were a few that we felt like were really more of a political decision that it wasn't really staff's position to be able to provide that recommendation. Of those 11 topics we provided recommendations on, the CAC generally agreed with 9 of those 11. And the main difference between staff and the CAC recommendations were 1, which is going to be item 4, and that was a discussion on independent movement by member governments from A-list to B-list projects. And 2, it was the maintenance of effort or MOE base year discussion. Before I get specifically to addressing the differences between the CAC on item 4, I think it's going to be important to hear the body of what staff recommended in items 1 through 3 first. So with the board's permission, what I'd like to do is to walk through the staff's recommendation on 1 through 4 first. So you can kind of hear the body of what staff is thinking, and then we can talk about what the CAC may have thought as differences, and then open up discussion if that's acceptable.
Any concern from the board members on that? No, I
Okay,
don't hear
great.
any.
All right, and I apologize. There's a lot of detail here that we've spent months ironing out. So as Rick's mentioned that Jennifer's staff and my staff, along with the other three member governments, have worked closely to come up with these recommendations and back with PPRTA staff to present this to you today. So I want to make sure they got recognition for that. So item 1A or items 1A through D, they all really focus around program funds. Whether or not each entity should be allowed to request them, how they get presented on the ballot, whether or not we should have a regional grant match program fund, and whether or not we should have a regional federal state companion program fund. So kind of stepping through those, staff is recommending that we leave the opportunity for each member government to request an A-list program fund. Similar to A-list projects, those entities could request those program funds as for consideration on the ballot and present those to the CAC board. Like the projects, these program funds would be budgeted annually through the normal budget process, and changes to these budgets would need to be justified by the requesting entity. Moving on to part B of that, capital programs should be included in the ballot in alphabetical order, just like the rest of the projects. By default, capital programs and projects are going to be prioritized again through that annual budget process. And each entity requesting capital program funds must demonstrate a capital improvement program or a way to complete their A-list projects in addition to their capital programs. 3, and this is the big one, I think that you guys are most interested in hearing about, and we've had a lot of discussion. We are recommending that we include a state or federal discretionary grant match program fund on the A-list. This program could be available for any member government to use for potential local match funds. We would consider either a nominal or no initial budget, and likely a no initial budget to start off with that, where the board can approve either through the budget process or a budget amendment to provide matching funds in that program. We would recommend establishing a policy that the board could use for this program when considering for applying for grants for this federal program. And I just want to try and segue a little bit from what's here. One of the things that's beautiful about PPRTA is that we've got identified projects, whether they're on the A list or B list. And for a lot of member governments to have the ability to go out and get outside federal funding, it's the match requirement is beyond what any of the member governments, to include the city of Colorado Springs, could typically come. So this is a great opportunity to go bring other money in or leverage PPRTA funding in there. I will mention the reason why you would have to establish a policy for a member government to come and apply, because when you apply for these larger federal grants, you have to have a financial commitment letter in your grant application up front. So for example, if you recall, I think it was just last month where I came and asked for the board's approval on a letter of recommendation from the PPRTA board, one of the statements we need to have in there is how those matching funds would be, or the commitment for the matching funds and how they'd be used to provide the local funds in that grant. So picking back up on our recommendation, specifically what was written, these projects that are grant funded could become a child under this grant match program, and that's the way they could be incorporated as part of the A list. I want to further describe this program, that the state and federal discretionary grant match program could be used to fulfill local match requirements for discretionary grants awarded by the state of Colorado, which we anticipate some programs likely being developed coming out of Senate Bill 260, or federal grant programs such as infra or RAISE grant, or future grant opportunities that could present themselves for federally declared disasters. This is not intended to serve as local match requirements for typical federal funds that are distributed and managed through PPACG's typical TIP program. I want to also mention, Maury brought this up, and we've kind of got this clause in here on this federally declared disasters. And please forgive me if I'm trying not to offend anyone, but let's say that there's a smaller member government that does have a federal disaster, whether it be a wildfire or a flood wiping out some transportation and infrastructure. FEMA could come and offer grants, but they still put a huge burden on a local community to provide matching funds. So it gives an opportunity for that local government to come forth if they had transportation infrastructure that was impacted, and come to the board and ask for support in the local match. So that's something that might be a little different. That's not administered under the US DOT, but could be coming or female, but we thought that was important to include as an opportunity.
Okay, go ahead. I see we have a question. Go ahead,
Yes.
Jennifer.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I think it's helpful to just interject with questions as they come up, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
So when I was reading this, one of the questions I had was where this would be placed on the A versus B lists. And if it was on the A list, in the probably unlikely chance that there was never a match needed, could you ever move off of the A list? Same question applies. What if you never finished one during the A list?
Well,
Well, I can answer that. The intent was for it to be on the A list. I actually don't know that I understand the second part of your question, to be quite honest with you.
Can I
So-
clarify? If it's
Yes,
got a
please.
$0 in it, you can check it off as complete.
Ballot question doesn't include ballot dollar figures.
Right.
So as previously drafted, so going on the assumption that we're using the previous ballot question as a model and working from that, which is a large assumption that I need to talk to the board about to begin with. But you would have a list of, we're doing Mark Shuffle Road, we're doing whatever project, and we're doing discretionary grant funding. And it says you have to complete all of the A-list projects, completely fund all the A-list projects before moving to the B-list. If you devoted no funding to the A-list, can you act that A-list project that's a match fund? Could you move to the B list? I mean, it's probably a question for me, but I'm posing it to the board.
Well-
Just a question.
Yeah, and so I think we, if I might, we might need to address the wording of it, but
Yes.
I think if you've got it saying discretionary and you put if approved or, some other thing, so it only kicks in if there actually is something that's approved. But I think the issue is one that has to be addressed, but I think that is the intent, that if nothing comes up, if there's no Cimarron interchange, there's no gap, there's no federal, what's the transportation, MIMSA? MAMSA, I'm gonna get that right.
Yeah, perfect. I'm just asking the question, sort of generate discussion, because I haven't been involved in the detailed discussions over the last several
Oh,
months.
this is really good.
The one item I will mention for future consideration as you formalize that language is percentage. So depending on which of these federal grants, or if it was a FEMA situation, the local requirement could be 20 to 50% or 20 to 51% is really kind of that range. So from a local match standpoint, so we could talk about maybe what the federal requirement or other funding that could be brought in to compare with that PPRTA money. Oh, maybe I should, yes.
No, in some cases, it's not a requirement. So as those of you that recall getting the funding for some of these other state projects, the more you come to the table with, the better it's reviewed. So it's not just coming in with the minimum, it's making it competitive with whatever the others competing for state funds are doing. And so I'd be a little wary of saying, it only covers the minimum, because there may be a project where the board says this is worth, let's say it's the new 4th lane on I-25, which is environmentally cleared and has all sorts of wonderful carpool and bus options as part of that. That's a fairly expensive project. And if we wanted to be competitive, we might need to come more than the minimum requirement.
Absolutely. So the discretionary grants, they have a minimum, but you're absolutely right, particularly like the infra grant, for example, to maximize your points, you wanted to bring a local match of over 50% to be the most competitive. So Mr. Williams is absolutely correct on that. But those are some things you can talk about as you work on the nuances. So let me get through this and then we can open up some more discussion, because I'm sure there's going to be more questions going around this. So I'm going to kind of talk about the voting associated with. So if the grant, let me be clear that if the project was already on the A list and already funded, that's actually no brainer. The funding's already there. It doesn't even fall underneath this program. However, if the project was on a B list, we would recommend that the board have a majority vote to approve inclusion or participation in this particular program. If the project was not on either the A list or B list, so like that would have to have one, obviously let a justification by the jurisdiction, but two, we would be recommending that a supermajority be considered for that, and however that gets defined by the board. When that state or federal discretionary grant match fund is included on the A list and the ballot, language may need to be added for the eligibility for this program. It will be set forth whether it be in the establishing IGA or by some board resolution for transparency to the electorate. I will add the fourth piece of this, that we are not recommending a separate CDOT companion project program be established. We feel like that there's member governments could either use other programs if they're available and relevant to partner with CDOT or other jurisdictions. Doesn't necessarily have to be CDOT, it could be a neighboring jurisdiction, to include some betterments if it's appropriate for the jurisdiction with that lead project. And I'm sure we can have more discussion on that topic later. I do want to hit the next three pretty quickly, and then I think we can open up some fairly good discussion. But point 2 was on the A or B list, whether or not there should be one list, whether or not the A and B list should be prioritized in alphabetical order, things like that. We are still recommending having both an A and B list, very similar to what we had for PPRTA 2. We also we recommend that each entity establish their own approach for establishing their A list. And staff, each of our staffs are already working on doing that. We do not recommend establishing a completion date for the A list for 2 reasons. One, we included in here is that we have revenue that comes in after the end of the PPRTA authorization that we're talking about. And 2, as things or priorities or issues arise, we want to be able to have the flexibility to program within our capital improvement programs, which is going to be the best benefit for the citizens or the members of PPRTA. 3 was whether or not to move a B list project to the A list language. And if the circumstances arise, should we be considering other non-PPRTA listed projects? Staff is not recommending revision to the ballot language. And we feel like if the grant match funding program is received, then the board again can provide the matching funds to the program we just discussed. We are not recommending outside non-discretionary program funds other than what we recommended. And we also discussed the voting in 3 above. Item 4, and this is for, as we recall, this is where we sort of had a divergence between staff and the CAC, as whether to move it from the A list to the B list. All entities must completely fund their A list projects before an entity can move from their B list, and what the wording would be in the ballot, or whether or not we should revise the ballot language. I will go through staff's recommendation first and then give you the highlights of the discussion of CAC and ultimately what their decision was. So staff did not recommend changing the ballot language. That ultimately, if there was a desire to change the ballot language, one of the things staff proposed is that we include either some language modifications or changes to that verbiage where it says completely funded prior to funding B list language. One thing that could be added is what we referred to as an engineering advancement program that could be listed on the A list. That program could be available for member governments that they could use to start advancing the engineering of B list projects as budget was allocated and approved by the board. If this program was on the A list, we would not anticipate initial funding, nor would we anticipate funding really for at least those first 5 years of the next PPRTA authorization. And then funding could be allocated to that particular activity as we had more knowledge of what the revenue projections are and make a determination with the board policy when we could start funding that, when we could still demonstrate a commitment to complete the A list projects. This potential program could not or should not impact the timing or the ability to complete A list projects. We also did not recommend that member governments move to the B list projects independently. That we recommended that, again, as the language is written now, it's more of a regional approach to complete what's the body of the A list before we advance to the B list. I also think that advises an opportunity that as the board evolves, issues evolve, board members change over time, that when the opportunity presents itself, it gives the board collectively to look at what's on the B list and to prioritize the B list at the time. So those were staff's recommendations in the first four. I will say that on this particular point is where we had the divergence from CAC. There had been a lot of discussion whether or not we should just consider having this engineering advancement placed, have it no earlier than the 6th year of the authorization. That vote actually failed with the CAC, but what they ended up voting on and approving was to allow member governments to independently move to their B list. This, as I pointed out, this vote was not consistent with staff's recommendations and will require ballot language changes and potentially an amendment specifically to the establishing IGA. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'd like to turn it over to you and for
Thank you.
discussion.
Thank you, Gail. Yeah, so floor is open for discussion on, I would assume, each of these 4 items before we move on to the others, specifically the 4th one, unless you've got concerns on both the CAC and the staff's recommendation on 1 through 3. Yes, Mr. Williams.
Thanks. Let me talk a little bit about this divergence in 4, and I'd be interested to hear what Jim has to say, and or Rev, whoever wants to present from CAC. But here's my concern. I like the concept of the engineering advance, and here's why. When you look at how a project comes to fruition, for these large projects particularly, you first have to design it, then you have to acquire the right of way, and then you build it. And if you say you have to completely fund all of A before you can even begin designing it, knowing it takes a while to do this process, we're talking about the Mark Shuffle design contract that was approved today may take a couple years before it's ready to go. So you would have a very long period during which nothing would be getting done. And that long period would happen to coincide with when PPRTA 4 goes on the ballot. If you look at when logically you would get near finishing the A projects. So I like the concept of being able to start doing some engineering and planning ahead of time. And I'm curious as to what CAC's thoughts are on the separate part of that, which is, can you move independently? It's a little more complicated to explain to voters. When you say, trust us, we will get done our projects before we start the others, but except some jurisdictions might be doing it differently. On the other hand, this is why I think it's appropriate for discussion. It kind of does put the incentive on the sponsoring entity to keep things closer to budget, because you benefit if you're the one that runs it more frugally. And so if you don't have, if you were able to do things more cost effectively, then you get to your B list project without having to wait for others. So but those are my 2 thoughts from that. And I'm interested to see what Jim has to say. And it looks like he's willing to do that.
Come on up, Jim.
Anybody got a flag vest?
No, you're all right.
No, thank you, Jim Godfrey, Chair of the CAC. I just pointed in your packet also, other than the executive summary, shows you how the CAC voted on these. This was one of our more detailed and elongated discussions, as you might imagine. And on the advancement, engineering advancement, that vote was 5-8 against it doing that. So relatively close, a lot of new members on here, but some of it was the issue of public perception of spending money on B-list projects before the A was done. A I won't go in the details, but there was a back and forth on this. And there were some people that changed their opinion during the discussion. There's the idea of having detailed discussions on this. I do not honestly recall the prevailing vote of why it failed. It slips my mind right now. It's been a couple months, because this was one we took on in May. But I can tell you that there was a lot of discussion about that. Personally, I voted for it, so just I'll duck around the other shots, but not this one. On the moving independent, same thing, a lot of discussion. One of the prevailing discussions was some of the smaller entities wouldn't be able to go to their B list. Maybe they had 2 A list projects and they wouldn't be able to go to the B list for 8 years until everybody else finished the A. And the counter argument was, why have a B list if you're only going to have 3 projects? If you've got the deal. So there was an argument back and forth on that. Right now, no, I won't even go there because I'm guessing. But again, that was a 9-4 vote on the independent. As a lot of it was in favor. Discussion was in favor of the smaller entities not having to wait till everybody else is done. You know, in RTA 1, we never got to the B list. It looks like we should get to the B list this time around. So we've never really had the experience of transitioning to a B list. So this particular RTA 2 will be a learning curve, if you will. Unfortunately, it just happens a little late in the decision-making process for us to guess how this is going to transition as we go through. But these 2 items took up, I don't know, I think our first meeting was what, 4 hours or so, and another 3+ or 4 hour other meeting. So a lot of discussion, but I just wanted to make sure that you saw that it was not a unanimous vote one way or the other. But that's the way it came out, and my job's to report the way it came out. So but I'll try to address any questions. I do have some more detailed notes at home, but unfortunately I just got back from a long road trip yesterday and I can't find my notes in the 5 minutes that I had to get ready for the thing. But I'll address any questions any members of the board have.
Did you enjoy your trip?
Yes.
I do have questions, actually, just in general. So I like the concept of the engineering advancement program because it gives our staff the time to start putting things out for design and such, especially if you have over a period of 10 years an area that starts to grow a lot faster than we expected, which is, you know, I don't know what it was 10 years ago. I mean, I do up here, but the member governments independently moving to B-list projects. My concern about that, frequently it seems like we loan each other money. We see a project that's a bigger need. So we got to really get this one done. We got to really get this one done. This is becoming, like Mark Scheffel has been a major problem for years and years. And it's a hot area that needs to be addressed sooner than later. And so if we're independently moving projects, are the member entities getting reimbursed for having shared the money?
Okay. Ms. Williams, if I could, I think it may be helpful for Jennifer and I to give you some background why we made a staff recommendation that may, and part of it does address what you brought up. So Jennifer, if you'd like to go first.
I think one point that we really wanted to make sure of is, and especially, you know, I personally feel this way, and this has kind of been at our direction of, you know, the final PPRTA board and our board of county commissioners, is that really looking at this as a regional program, whether or not it's the city leading a project or the county leading of the project, or we have a joint project. I think, you know, the success or failure of the PPRTA is really based upon the regionalism and putting our hats on to say that this is really a PPRTA project, promises made, promises kept, and we have to make sure that all those projects get done. The other part of it is that, you know, to provide the smaller member governments the ability to get those projects done sooner, we've advanced some of those. It would really de-incentivize, you know, trying to get some of those, advancing some of those monies, and then would really cause some of those smaller member jurisdictions, if we didn't advance those monies, to really wait till year 9 or 10 to do those projects. I'm not sure that that's in the best interest of our citizens. And then the other thing is, you know, just our joint projects. You know, ultimately, we have to make sure that we fund all those projects. And, you know, whether, you know, the money comes ultimately from, you know, the city's allocation or the county's allocation, in my opinion, and I think what we've, you know, kind of used here is kind of the intent of the voters is to make sure that we get all those projects done. And Gail may want to add to some of that.
Yeah, so thank you, Jennifer, for that. And the city of Wholehearted believes that, you know, it needs to be treated as a regional program, as Jennifer just stated. The one thing that in addition to the county essentially helping the smaller governments advance their projects sooner in the RTA lists as well, if we were allowed to independently move from the A list to B list as a member government, that would, one, as Jennifer mentioned, would basically kind of take that off the table. But two, it would really push us to use the census data that we use really just for planning versus approaching a regional approach, and it would limit the funding available to the smaller member governments. So we don't really think that would be advantageous for them to be stuck with basically that parsing out a partition of the RTA budget based on census basis.
Yeah, you raised a very good point. Because what we've historically done in the past is, and I'll pick Raymond because it's usually got one paving project that's there.
Yep.
And instead of, oh, we'll give you 10% of the money each year, it's been, wow, you're ready to go? Here's all of your money up front, get it done, which is way more efficient in terms of, as opposed to trying to do it 10% each year, gets a project on the ground quicker. And so I do think looking at it, you know, as opposed to silos, I think working holistically does make sense. So I'm persuaded by that argument. I'd forgotten that aspect of it, which is we did the same thing with Manitou. We've done the same thing with Raymond, Greenmount Falls. They got a project ready to go. Take your 10 years of cash all at once. And we're all fine and supportive of that because we're still in the engineering phase or doing some other part of ours. And so I think that's a good point that you all raised.
Well, and if I may, to add to that, it's all RTA money to begin with. And so the thing that the CAC looks at is, you know, we have moved some projects over the years from B to A because funding became available or a portion of the funding became available or this, that, and another. And the important part of that is while that may not be part of the rule, we've done the homework, we've got the justification, we've made those decisions, and we can stand behind those decisions and support those to the public. And so as that is an example, if Raymond's got a project, it doesn't make sense to do it 10% a year, fund the project, get it done, and move on to the other things. And we make that, you as board, make that discussion and make that decision as an informed decision. And we can stand behind that if we ever question or call the carpet on the public.
I would ask, does that mean, Mr. Williams, that you pull back your support for the engineering advanced program?
No, I absolutely support the engineering advancement program. It pulls back my ambivalence with respect to, do we hang together separately or together? And so I'm in favor of hanging together.
Mr. Chair, if I could, there's been a lot of discussion about how it affects the smaller member governments. If there's a smaller government, smaller member governments that want to speak to that specifically, I would love to hear from them specifically.
either online or in the room.
I think I'm the only one in the room.
I mean, I kind of put you on the hot seat there, but would love to hear your perspective. So
Yes,
we're
Mayor.
not talking around you in the room.
That did real good what we did with our paving project. Like you said, we got it finished with that. They didn't have to bring the machinery out time and time again. It was just done. They were in there, gone. And that worked out real well for Rama. I don't know about, with the city and the county, does the city have to finish the city, county, and all the small entities have to finish their A's all the way through before anybody can move to a B list?
Right, that's correct. and
Has to be
I-
funded.
Has to be
Not finished.
funded in its entirety. So for example, the city and county may each have some contracts that are underway. They would be funded and they're in construction. There could be money that I would say that would likely be the B list. And Jennifer Ivy, I'd look to you just to make sure that that's a correct statement. So yes, collectively, we all have to have the project funded, and that would be, I think, the industry standard for gauging that they were funded before we moved on to the B list. I will say, I wanted to pick something up, and Director Williams had said something too about the engineering advancement list. I want to make sure it was clear that we're recommending that just for the B list, not for projects that are outside the B list for consideration. And that was, as the other Director Williams mentioned, that would give us the opportunity to bridge that gap that sometimes happens in that project life cycle as we get to fully funding the A list to start developing the B list. So there is some advantages for that, and that all the member governments could take advantage of underneath that potential program if that was the direction we chose to go for in the ballot language.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my confusion on this, and hasn't happened in the past. So if we haven't fully funded all the A projects for all the entities, so we have one government entity who has finished, what is the benefit in making them wait 6 months or a year if they got to that a year in advance from starting their B list projects? They're literally not doing anything for a year.
Let me take a stab at that, and I'll role play the contrarian here. I think Rama has one project, or had one project in PPRTA 2, and it's done. So Rama can't go to its B list, and it has a project there. Green Mountain Falls has 2 projects on the PPRTA 2A list. They finished one. The second one, Stilling Basins, they could potentially design and construct that and have those done, whatever they are. With their remaining $250,000, they could probably finish that up in later this year or next year. So Green Mountain Falls, let's just hypothetically say, could finish its A list in mid or fall of 22. So PPRTA 2 doesn't run out till December 31 of 24. So what would Green Mountain Falls could be moving to its B list, and with 2.5 years remaining, hypothetically, and Rama as well, but right now they can't. So role playing the contrarian, that would be the argument. That would be the flip side of the coin argument to allow member governments to move independently to their B list.
But that doesn't answer my question of what. So what's the what is the benefit of making them wait 2 years? I mean, they're literally just sitting, not doing anything with incoming funds.
So let me, if I can at least take a stab at it. So first, when you've only got 1 or 2 projects in a 10-year period, you're going to be sitting for
A while.
8 of the years, right? I mean, there's just, so in the case of a small entity that only has a couple projects, yes, they're going to be sitting from project to project. The question is, the current system allows us to advance it because they're not then clamoring saying, we're done, we're ready to go to A, because they recognize that everybody else advanced the funding to them. With respect to the larger entities that do have projects every year, so let's say the county or the city of Colorado Springs finished more quickly than the other. if you have that engineering advance, they wouldn't be sitting there doing nothing. They would be getting ready for the next project. So they would be doing, and that's why the combination of those two, I think, makes some sense. They'd say, okay, so we're going to be ready for our category B projects. We're going to be doing the engineering, the right of way acquisition and other things prior to the actual construction. The actual advantage, though, is that way there is that shared incentive to all work together to deliver on the promise to the voters. And the challenge with a promise to the voters of, well, most of us got our category A projects done, so trust us, maybe your jurisdiction will be one of those that gets them done next time, gets a little fuzzier, and it gets less clear to a voter that yes, we are actually going to deliver on all of these projects. And that's part of what's made RTA work, is the knowledge of the voters that everything has to be done in A before you go to B. So that would be my response is you start making it murkier for the voters to know whether their projects will actually get done. Because how do I know my jurisdiction will get it done ahead of time if there's no incentive that we all have to get it done?
I would think it's the allocation of the funds that's been set for the A list. I guess there would be the potential that an A list item for an entity would not get done if we've already moved to a B list entity, the potential. Yes. Yes. Jen.
I would also mention that in our examples, we've talked about the large entities versus the small entities. It could be the converse. It could be a large entity that affects another large entity. For example, we, the county, could, do a great job and get everything done. And then, or the city could do the same and then say, hey, we're ready to go onto the B list and have a project for $20 million that we want to do. And in the end, the city may have a project, in year 10 that they may had not realized may have cost $5 more million. And having us, the county, move into that second project for 10 takes away their ability to maybe get that original A-list project done. So.
Yeah, and I'll just add too, again, we're looking at the spirit of a regional delivery of transportation projects too. We want to make sure we're leaving the board the opportunity to prioritize the B list, right? Otherwise, you're leaving it to a individual member government when they make that choice versus the board having that direction on how to prioritize the B list.
And I'm just, since Director Wayne Williams mentioned the voters, I'll just go to a very boring practical consideration since I'll be the one that has to bring you a ballot question. Your ballot question is already long and it's already slightly confusing from an average voter standpoint, right? It talks about A-list, B-list funding, going to this first. We're talking about X percentage for capital dollars. We've got this long list of projects. If we're now going to do entity by entity, and entity Colorado Springs can go from their A to their B as soon as they fund it, the ballot's going to get longer and longer and more confusing. I'm not saying that I can't draft it. I can draft that. But once you get to a 5-page ballot, if I was a voter, I'd be like, what is, okay, forget it. No, so just a practical consideration from the ballot drafting standpoint.
Yes, Commissioner Geithner.
I think part of what my consideration is, and certainly correct me if I'm wrong here, but I actually feel like it dilutes the concept of an A list and a B list altogether. And so I would say if that is the consideration, then why would we even have an A and B list? Why not just have a list? And then because that's essentially how it seems like that could play out.
A question. Why don't we, in this next coming election, not put so many on an A list? And then that would give room for opening up and getting to B list projects. Why do we have to have, so many?
And that's kind of like leading to my second half, right? If say, well, don't have so many A's, but if you have B's and somebody else doesn't get to the finish their A's, you can't go to your B's. So what this is incentivizing is you to have a bigger A list than is necessary. So if I'm concerned, or if a small entity is concerned, I might not be allowed to move to my B list. Well, guess what? I'm gonna have, instead of having a fair split of what I think should be a 60% A list and 40% B list, I'm gonna tell staff, well, maybe some other entity not allowing me to go to the B list will move 3 of those B lists to the A list. But then guess what that does? We get to the point where we can fund whatever we want as an A list. And at the end of PPRTA 3, we still have, why does everybody have 3 or 4 projects still in the A list? Well, because we front loaded A list because we might not be allowed to go to a B list. So I get all the issues here, but the discussion points here are going to incentivize just having all A list. Unfortunately.
Let me respond to that because so first, as we come to that point where we are creating that list, and this is one of the purposes for getting better cost estimates, Commissioner, which is something you addressed earlier when you're talking about and casting your no vote on Colorado Boulevard, is we're trying to get those better cost estimates so it's there. And those allocations are done based on the anticipated percentages of dollars available to each entity. And so if someone were to do what you said, which is stick everything in the A list, then we would not complete all of the A list projects and RTA 4 would be dead. So we have avoided that. And I believe we need to continue to avoid that. And at some point, what we've done in the past, so the little history, we did a 90% estimated funding for A in RTA 1 with a 10% or 20% for B and then the rest in C. So we had 3 categories. Some things ran slightly more expensive. We wound up finishing the A, so we were at the 90%. But we got there and we worked together. But in some cases, we said we don't have money to do more. So we talked about Mark Shuffle earlier today. That was a county project where we said we have X amount of dollars for Mark Shuffle. And when the money ran out, the widening ran out. And so Commissioner Geithner could tell you exactly where it stops in her district as you go up part way. Councilmember O'Malley could tell you, since he lives east of Mark Shuffle, exactly where it stops. And that's where the money ran out. So we can finish, quote, finish it in terms of the completion. That's why it talks about funding. But you did raise a separate question, which is what should that percentage be? So I think this time RTA went with, RTA 2 is based on, I think, an 80% or 70, I forget where it was. 75% is where the A line was drawn. But we didn't do a very good job of costing out some of the things. Colorado earlier today being one of those examples. And so that is, and I don't see that recommendation in here. But that is a key question that we have to ask in RTA 3 is at what percentage are you anticipating that line being drawn?
And we do discuss that high level in item 15, but we have not recommended that actual percentage. But what we have said is that the smaller member governments, that would they bring their projects forward, they have they're going to have a revenue planning threshold with their estimates to consider. So they know if it's 1, 2, 3 projects, they would need to bring them out. We would work with them on that to see how that fit more overall globally. And then the city and county would look at a threshold, and we've talked about 70, 75, 80%. It's kind of varied for the reasons you just mentioned.
Okay. So the county and the city of Colorado Springs, there's at least one other city that's part of us, as they sometimes remind me, is the same percentage ought to be used for the large entities so that we're at about that same process. But I think that is an important question of where do you draw that line between A and B? And there's three factors, right, that we're talking about. One is, what does the cost of construction do? Two is how accurate your estimates are of what actually needs to be done. And three is how much sales tax comes in. And if you can predict any of those with 100% certainty, I would like to invest in your company. Because we can't. So that's why it's an estimate. And I think the county and city of Colorado Springs can work together to do that. And then do the best estimates we can for where the smaller entities are going to be. But we have to tell people what that dollar threshold, and is that category A going to be an anticipated 75%? Is it going to be 80? I will tell you that 90 is cutting it too close. This time it was 75, and it looks like we'll be into some because of the increase in sales tax. But had that not occurred, had we not shift to collecting online sales taxes in the state of Colorado, we would be struggling to complete A. And so I don't know where that number should be, but that is a separate question. And it's a question that needs to be as a recommendation as to what staff says where we think we should be.
So do we want to add that, or do we want to include it into item 15?
It is, we started addressing that discussion in item 15, and I think it would be good when we start talking about revenue, really what those thresholds are.
Do we add it? I mean, we'll
It's
flush it
included,
out.
yes.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I thought of a brand new idea in response to what Commissioner Gonzalez said just a minute ago. A way to finesse or get to the B, or I should have generated my thoughts before I started talking. Let me just cut to the bottom line. If all member governments have at least one program fund, that's a generally worded capital project that can be funded if they complete their 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 or however many projects, and we're still collectively waiting to go from A to B. If every one of the member governments has a program fund, then that can be funded to do additional projects while they're waiting for others to get to completely fund, so that all can go to the B list. So if all 5 have at least one program fund, and Green Mountain Falls has indicated that they are, then nobody will be held up and not get funding because they've completed their Bs while they're completed their As while they're waiting to get to their Bs.
Go ahead, Jim.
Jim Godfrey from the CAC. On the surface, I think the CAC would resist that a little bit, in that we've tried to stay away from large capital construction projects. While it's considered capital, it's more of the smaller things, intersection improvements, this kind of stuff. Not taking on building of a road has been the general use of those category funds to date. Not saying you can't change that, but I'm not sure that having a general catch-all where I can create a road project, and just because I have a general fund that we go fund that, meets the intent of the public in having an A and a B list. That's just an initial reaction to see how the CAC might respond to that.
If I may, I wouldn't be playing the boring lawyer if I didn't just take this back to like a 30,000 foot level and tell you all, I'm sure you all probably know, but there are some new people on the board. So there is no requirement for an A or B list. There's no requirement for a list at all legally. I mean, this has just sort of been the pattern that has been followed. It's part of the promises made, promises kept. It's what the voters expect. But just from a legal standpoint, I just want all the board members to understand that the ballot could just say, shall taxes be extended, increased, continued, whatever language we decide on using for the next 10-year period to be used for regional transportation improvement, capital improvement projects, whatever that magic language is. Period. there's no reason, I mean, there's no legal requirement to have the lists. I know that that is what everyone desires, but I just want to make sure everyone understands that.
Can I respond on two levels for that? The first one's the obvious one, which is then what do you tell the voters you're actually promising? Trust, I agree, you're totally right. Right. You're totally right, but there are two major issues. One of them is, how do the voters have that confidence that yes, something's going to get done that they see there? The other one is then this board's discussions become really much a free-for-all. If nothing was listed there, how do we decide which is there? And
I'm just trying to make the meetings much more fun.
and so the city of Colorado Springs gets together with Reba at Green Mountain Falls and said, we're going to take all the money. I mean, that would just be a politically, legally you're correct.
Yeah,
Politically,
not
it's a bad
suggesting,
idea.
not suggesting we change anything, but I wouldn't be doing my job if I wasn't just explaining the legal confines we're working in.
I agree.
All right, I'm going to throw a ringer in here. And so I'm looking at the clock, and most of my experience in my adult life has been that anything over 2 hours, people's brains start to mush. So.
You can come to the CAC anytime.
So my intent is to go, we still have some items on the list, but what I want to do before we take a little break is I want to set the ground, set the rules here, for us to, what do we want to get accomplished today? Here's my opinion. We're pretty close to, I think, Gail, Jennifer, tell me if we're wrong, of getting through items line 1 through 4. Was your intent to go beyond that today?
I think it may be worthwhile to at least see staff's recommendations for the other 7 items, just so that the directors are aware. I'm not saying that we have discussion on it, but it would give some thought for them to take back. And maybe here as staff presents them, it comes out a little bit differently than what you see in writing. If we had time, I do know we have some other business items on the agenda. And if you wanted to hit the other business items and come back to this, we would still be available to do that.
I would note that a lot of the items coming up there's some easy ones coming up. They led with the hard ones.
Yes, that's good. All right. Let's take a 10-minute break. We'll be back at 3:30. I do want to be out of here by 4, which means I've got to, so
Okay.
we're on break.
I like that.
We're,
I thought you said 4:30.
I can't remember.
my intent is to be out of here at 4. All right, let's re-adjourn. I mean, yeah.
There we go, yeah.
I got
I'd vote
adjourned
for that.
on my mind.
I'll second it.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's come back together and continue our fun-filled afternoon. I've been given a gavel now, so I like this. That's right. All right, when we left off discussion, we were still on item 4, discussing the A and B list. And I think we have talked through item 4, unless someone else has. And for those in the audience, please feel free to stand up, wave your arms, and get our attention up here, and I will acknowledge you, because I absolutely want participation. Gail, do you agree that we exhausted ourselves with number 4 yet?
I think for now we have, Mr. Chair. I think it's obviously we're going to need to come back and revisit it likely next month, but I think it would be worthwhile to shelve those and let folks think about that, maybe talk with their respective staff members and amongst themselves before we go any further with those 4 items.
I think that's an excellent recommendation. Okay. You may continue with line number 5.
Okay. So item number 5 was to whether or not we should amend the ballot language to allow the board to add capital projects in the 10-year cycle without going through the public vote. And if those of you who are around when the gap was included, this is really what it's trying to address. And then the question comes up, would it be added to the A or B list, and would that require a supermajority vote? Overall, staff does not recommend a ballot language change for this item. If there is a new capital project that's not on either the A or B list and it can't be added through some of the programs we added today, we actually recommend that a new ballot measure does be presented to the electorate for consideration separately. Okay. I like it when we can move on quickly.
Yes.
So item number 6 is also, this is a lot of discussion about if a member government were to add midstream and if they could add capital projects midstream. A lot of components on that. Staff was still hesitant to change the ballot language at this time. And we did ask that if we needed to proceed with this, we asked for some legal advice on proceeding with ballot language. But we recommended deferring that decision on including new capital projects with a midstream member until the point where that were to happen. Because there's obviously that new member government would have to go through and get consideration by their electorate whether or not they should join. And then the IGA amendment, and we could decide if we want to incorporate capital projects. Then I would guess we would likely have to go to a ballot language.
Yeah, unless the ballot contemplated the ability to add for a new member of government as part of the voter approved ballot language, you wouldn't be able to add midstream without another election to change the list.
Right. Yeah. And staff's not recommending putting that consideration right now, particularly with our efforts reaching out to other member governments. Just don't think that's maybe in our best interest. 7, that's one that board had already decided upon. 8. This is also, again, with a member government, if they were going to join PPRTA or choose to join PPRTA, that they would need to go in either November of 21 or April of 22 in prior consideration for PPRTA 3. Number 9, the question was whether or not we should have a portion of the A list set aside or something identified in the A or B list to support the Front Range passenger rail. Staff does not recommend including anything for the Front Range passenger rail as the project needs a lot more detail and further consideration. And we wrote this before the district formation was considered in the ballot language, but we still, regardless of that, still do not feel like that should be addressed by PPRTA.
Yeah, do we want to discuss that one at this point in time? I think that's a good,
Agree.
yeah.
All right, so moving on, so 10, 11, and 12, and 13 for that matter, staff did not feel like we were in the best position or to give you recommendations, felt like that needed to be more of a discussion with the directors.
Can we stop there for a moment on the
Yes.
number 10 clearly is an issue. Yes, go ahead.
So I should report to the board that yesterday, the City of Colorado Springs approved the addition of Callahan, provided the relative weight of the entities is maintained for the city and county. And so I do want to hear from Jennifer with respect to, there's 2 ways that can be done. One is, and let me back up. So right now, when we created the RTA, there were 3 members from the city, 3 from the county, and 2 from the smaller communities. When we added our friends for Rama, it became 3, 3, and 3. The city is not, based on the vote of city council yesterday, is not willing to accept going to less than 1/3 of the votes. But we welcome others coming in. And so there are multiple ways that can be done. One is to increase the city and county to 4 each. And then if Palmer Lake comes in 5 each and Monument comes in 6 each, and then now they can include county elected officials because we did check that already. And the other is through a weighted system, which would be a lot simpler to do. And so Jennifer, can we do that?
Well, first I'm going to ask you a question because the copy of the resolution that I got from the city council packet says that It's conditioned upon adequate representation of the city of Colorado Springs on the Pikes Peak RTA board. Adequate to me is a pretty flexible term, so I don't know what adequate means.
I will tell you from the discussion of city council, that means one of two things, either more members or a wait so that we continue to maintain it at least that 1/3 level. There were some that wanted more than that. And not surprising. Because if you look at the total allocation of funds under the RTA, the city of Colorado Springs contributes about 70% of the sales tax. And so my argument in response to that is we happen to have 5 members of this board who live within the city of Colorado Springs. Last I checked, Lahinos and Holly both live within the city. That city voters vote for the county commissioners. And so although Commissioner Geithner lives outside the city of Colorado Springs, there are a fair number of her electors who live within the city of Colorado Springs. And similarly, the county has all of its voters live in all of the jurisdictions. So, but that's essentially what we said, and that's what the condition was, is we need to stay at least 1/3.
Okay, so to the question of whether weighted voting is allowed, I would love to engage in a conversation with any member entity's attorney that is suggesting weighted voting so that we can have that conversation. I have not found any example in the statutes of a political subdivision of the state of Colorado that has weighted voting, statutorily authorized, if you will. That doesn't mean it's not allowed. I haven't done a deep dive because the board and staff haven't requested that we go through that deep dive research, but essentially the weighted voting would be an amendment to the establishing IGA. And the establishing IGA, while it's what gives this board life and what I help advise the board on, is an agreement between the member governments. So I would really want to have that discussion a bit further with the member government attorneys and then with this board, probably an executive session.
Okay, so let me then make the formal request. I will point out that because we did some research on this, and Dr. Cog does have that provision for weighted voting in their Council of Governments.
But not a political subdivision of the state.
Except Dr. Cog now became a political subdivision effectively through the last transportation bill that allows them to put a tax on.
The legislature seems to be confused as to who has taxing authority, in my opinion, but.
Okay, well, that's a separate, let's not resolve that one. But let me make the formal request that you do that research, that you contact Wynetta Massey at the city attorney's office. And while, you know, more's the merrier is at least one argument that can be made, it would be, I think, cleaner to do that. And to explain the arguments, not that we don't love our less populous friends, it is that particularly in the opinion of some of my colleagues who are less confident in the RTA, there is a concern that if you continue to add member entities, ultimately you could get to the point that you could have, say, 7 of the smaller jurisdictions in the community. You know, since we've thrown out Green Mountain Falls and Teller, or we've thrown out Woodland Park as a possibility, we've thrown out some others because they're in the PPACG area. And you could get to the point where legally all of the smaller communities representing 100,000 people or less could outvote the city and the county combined. That's, it's not that we don't value your input, we do. It's just trying to have that right balance. And when we struck the RTA deal, as it was, with working with the city and county and the other jurisdictions that were interested, the concept was to have that balance. And we weren't aware it would be as wildly successful as it is, and people would be clamoring to get in. And so we didn't address what happens as the number of smaller entities continues to grow. If Falcon were to incorporate at some point, if Black Forest were to incorporate at some point, and I'm not saying they should, please understand, but there have been at least efforts in both areas, wildly rejected in the case of Black Forest, But there have been efforts of various entities to incorporate, and that could certainly happen in the future. And so you could get to the point where you could have 15 entities here, and again, 90% of the population having 30% of the votes. And so that's our concern. I don't know if that concern is shared by my colleagues on the commission, but certainly speaking from the city council representatives, and particularly some of my other colleagues who have more of a concern than even I do, that was the condition. And so just to clarify, at least a third.
Great. And all joking aside, if anyone has any information about Dr. Cog transitioning to a political subdivision or how that works, I know, Andy, you have some information about the weighted voting, but I would be interested in seeing that because it's always been sort of an enigma what MPOs really are.
Well, and maybe there's a way to write the establishing IGA where there's a weighted vote, and if that is not permitted, if a court says that's not permitted, then it goes to a larger number. So the number of county votes, the number of city votes equals the number of other entities. So, but we do want it revised, but we want it revised in a way that doesn't require revision every time we add somebody.
Right.
So that the wording is more broad. And maybe there's a way to write it so that it's shall be a weighted vote, or maybe it's or such other matter as. In any case, you've got the general idea. Does anybody object to giving Jennifer Ivy this instruction to look at this?
Anyone online? I don't see any.
This is John Graham from Manitou. I think that's a good proposal. I think that what Mr. Williams has suggested is a good course of action.
All right. Yes, Rick.
Just a question for Jennifer Ivy. Would weighted voting then require an amendment to IGA between the 5-member governments? Whether it's weighted voting or if the city wanted a 4th director, that sounds like it might have to go to the IGA, which has to go to the 5-member governments. All 5 have to agree by a minimum of 2/3 vote of the entire membership of each of the governing bodies of the 5.
Yes, all of that. And if you can answer the weighted voting question legally too, that'd be great.
No.
Yeah, which is why we don't want to have to do this every time we add another entity. And so a broader language, I think, is really what needs to be done. And I will tell you, PPACG, before any of you were on it, used to have 2 separate meetings. One for the urban MPO and one for the COG area. And we had a separate president of each, or a separate chair of each. And so it was way unwieldy.
That
Now
must have been fun.
yeah, and so we consolidated it, but there is a provision, as I recall, in PPHG that allows some of the people not to be allowed to vote on certain issues.
Yeah, like the tip that's controlled by in the MPO area, for instance. Yeah.
So, but we want to be as inclusive as possible, but we also want to make sure that the city voters and I presume likely the county voters are protected.
With that said, from an administrative point of view, clearly, tell me if I'm wrong, this would not be on the ballot.
Correct.
Yeah, this is an IGA that we work through the IGA. So this would not be on the ballot. Okay.
Correct. And just to add a little bit of what the procedure has been in the past, at least, as I was saying, the IGA is between the member governments. It's not, the PPRTA is not a party to it. But because what we've done in the past is we've basically referred out what the PPRTA would like the member governments to include with input from the member governments. So here with weighted voting. So while I'm trying to say it's not really all my call, I've typically been the drafter of that and then referred it out. So I just want to make sure that, want to streamline the process as much as possible to make sure that the member governments are satisfied with what might get referred out, which is why I want to open that conversation.
Can you kind of report back next meeting? And probably schedule an exec session as part of it.
Yeah, we talked about that doing an exec session.
Okay.
I guess another question for Jennifer is, I have not looked at your timetable for the Callahan inclusion. How does and we're waiting to hear, we've heard from Rama, relative, thumbs up on Callahan, waiting to hear from Manitou, Greenmount Falls and the county. We've now heard from the city, but it's conditional. What does that time extension to resolve the condition do to your timetable relative to Callahan going to the ballot in November of 21?
So the approval isn't needed prior to Callahan going to the ballot. The approval of the member governments is needed prior to them joining, which wouldn't be effective until January 1st. From a practical standpoint, in the timeline that I presented to the board previously, I put the approvals before they would have to make the ballot decision, because if I was putting myself in the town of Callahan's shoes, I'd want the approvals first before I spent the money on the ballot question, which is why that we then in our PPRTA resolution ask for the member governments to consider this by August 1st. I would say the city has considered it and given an answer. So at this point, it's up to the town of Callahan whether they feel comfortable proceeding with the election, knowing that they have at least one conditional approval at this point. From an election standpoint, it's the end of July-ish is when you have to agree with the county if you're going to have a coordinated election. Thank you, 23rd. And then it's end of August-ish. Again, I haven't looked at the dates recently, that they actually have to certify a ballot.
So perhaps we could get a copy of the city's resolution and we'll go over it with our county attorney. Thanks. Because that's a great starting place. You guys did all the work so far. Thanks.
So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but from the timetable, it doesn't alter their ability to join. It just puts a bit more risk in Callahan's court.
All right, we beat that one up pretty good.
Would you like me to pick
Yeah.
up with item 14, Mr. Chair?
So did we get through?
Well, essentially, staff did not have recommendations. Director Williams wanted to pause and have that discussion over an item. Staff did not have a recommendation. Staff still has input on 3 more items if you'd like us to
Yes, go
continue.
ahead.
Can we just go through hit these others in quick order though?
Yes,
Yes.
that's right.
So on the prospective new members, probably worth noting that Rick and Andy met with the town of Palmer Lake, and I have a meeting with the town of Monument on Monday night with respect to other entities that are, so these aren't completely like pie in the sky. This is not, yes, they want to yet, but I've had a meeting with the mayor and town manager. And so we've had those discussions, but mine's with the full town council on Monday evening. And it's a publicly noticed meeting. And Andy and Rick had a meeting with, I think, the town manager and the mayor of Palmer Lake.
Right, right. I would say the only hard no's that we've gotten from this list so far are Fountain and Woodland Park. So the others haven't closed the door. They're open to the conversation. Good conversation with Palmer Lake about a month ago. And we can certainly follow up and see what they think the next steps might be if they're interested to take this a little bit further.
And that's the only one of those I wanted to just mention because I thought it's appropriate for the board to know what's going on there.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead, Gail.
Okay, so item 14 was the topic we've had today about improved cost estimates. So kind of twofold. The city and the county have talked about this a lot, that we want to put a more programmatic approach and use some of the industry standards on putting together the cost estimates for the level of detail that we have. As you can see with what we've written, that I refer to it as a class 5 estimate, but basically a concept level estimate. We want to develop that using a more thorough review on the scope of work, a risk assessment, and regulatory requirements for what we know today. And I say that's important because I know Director Wayne Williams mentioned earlier the three things that kind of impact our cost estimate. The big thing that's floating around out there for us right now is actually regulatory changes, and that was some of the impact on RTA 2 and an impact on RTA 3 that we're concerned about. But I do want to let you know that even if we do look at contingencies that get added onto this, the industry standard would be to half the cost or a negative 50% to up to 100% of additional cost, even going through this very detailed estimate when you get an 80% level of competency. So I just want to put that out there that it is really kind of the cost estimating industry standard, but we still are going to be taking a much different approach. I have the first draft of a scope of work that I'm going to be sharing with Rick here on getting consultants that have the construction cost estimating expertise under contract that assist with some of that better estimating efforts here in the future. 15, I'm going to hit just very briefly because I think most of the directors are the same that were here previously. I think Director Geithner and Director Helms may be different, but the city and county work together on three initial revenue projection scenarios that we've given presentations on. They all are conservative, but they all have some flexibility, and we have basically want to set that aside for a short period of time as we continue to see revenue through 21 and set what that baseline is, and then the methodology would still be the same for what we presented previously. This is the area, though, that we talk about really more of that planning of what we need to happen with a threshold. So this is where we feel it would be important, again, for a smaller member of governments where we know that their budgeted revenue projection that they're going to be using to identify projects are going to be on the smaller side. So bring those projects forward, consideration, we can look at those in the bigger regional bucket and see if that makes sense to include them. And then the city and the county basically use the remaining revenue upon that and put a 75% threshold on that from a planning purpose to distinguish between the A and B lists. Obviously, those projects that get considered with the small member governments, those will be coming back to the board for consideration. There may be some discussion on that, but I think that still is going to give us enough opportunity and buffer to have some flexibility we've talked about with the programs and some of the unforeseen conditions that we may experience.
If I can just clarify. So for the smaller entities, we'd presume, and that their category A would just budget at 100%. Is that what you were saying? And
At 100% or probably even being rounded up would be my guess, because in some of the, for the town of Raymond, for example, it's actually a small dollar amount when you look at the bigger picture of the bucket, but they're going to have projects that are still, like if we had 500,000, still their smallest project might be $1 million. I think it's going to be important to consider that upfront from a regional standpoint. And those would be coming back for the board for consideration and inclusion that way.
Okay, and then for the two larger entities for whom the bulk of the funding goes, it would be looking at a category A of a 75% approximately.
That is what we've discussed.
So that sounds reasonable to me. I'm just looking down.
Yeah, anyone else online? Any comments online? That seems too easy.
All right, I will mention the last one, and I suspect there's going to be a lot of discussion around this. And I'm not suggesting that we have the discussion today, but I do want to point out what staff's recommendation is, and that there was a difference between what staff recommended and what the CAC voted on. This is one that was added on to the matrix later on. It was about the maintenance of effort requirements that it was originally discussed in about language. And there is a PPRTA policy 11, which further defines what that base year is for the maintenance of effort percentage. Again, staff did not recommend a change. The CAC, and I don't know if Mr. Godfrey wants to talk about this, but the CAC had a lot of discussion about this and felt like the base year maintenance of effort level should be discussed, but they did also recognize that there probably needed to have some additional input by financial staff with each of the member governments for consideration by the board. So I don't know if there's I think the main action here is there's others you want to involve in that discussion, or if you want to have further discussion amongst the board of directors, whether or not there should be changes to that policy 11 or anything else surrounding the maintenance of effort discussion.
Yeah, I agree that that's going to take some in-depth, probably a little bit more than what we got time here today. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I'll just be real quick. I have a concern with changing the baseline year because that then discourages a member government from spending more money in the future because that could be held to be the baseline year for some other. And so I'm concerned that has a net effect long-term over the decades, what I hope are the decades of this, because the maintenance of effort isn't in the capital side. Right, it's in the perpetual transit and maintenance sides. So to establish a precedent that we would be potentially changing what that maintenance of effort is beyond what people agreed to discourages someone in the future from spending more money because they are now locked into this higher amount according to the maintenance of effort provision. So I, for one, am very wary of that change. So that's just my input. I realize we don't have time for a full discussion, but and Jim, so your next CAC, I'd be interested to express that concern to him. And I don't know if you've got a quick response now.
I do have a quick response, and I think the answer, the gist was that was a low threshold to the easy to meet. Why not raise it? So we put more money into the maintenance and in that category. And so it was one of our other long discussions.
And I will tell you, I'm not sure to what extent without going to each of the member governments and getting their consent, whether that's an appropriate action at all.
And we also recognize
board.
that during the recession, the accounting systems changed, and it's very hard to go back and figure out because some of the compartments or departments and stuff were combined, and it's very hard to go back and look at that. But they felt like it just should be updated. They didn't have a specific thing, but obviously we need additional information from the financial folks. So, but I'll pass that along.
Yes, Rick.
Just a quick comment. Gail correctly mentioned at the CAC meeting that if a year was selected that included the city's 2C funding, and eventually 2C was not continued by the voters in the city of Colorado Springs, that would set an enormous base year, an enormous difficulty for the city. So so that's where I think the CAC was trying to shimmy up the ladder and pick some year more current, but maybe not pick a year during 2C.
And and that illustrates the whole problem with changing the base year, because it effectively discourages an entity from going to their voters and saying, will you give us some extra money? Because can the Pikes Peak RTA come along and say, aha, that's the year we're going to count? And if RAMA gets this great federal grant and does a whole bunch of stuff, does that suddenly raise their base forever? And I'm just very wary of that change beyond what the entities agreed to at the time.
All right, thank you very much. And Jennifer, go ahead.
In addition, one of the things that we also mentioned at that meeting is that there are some entities, for example, the county, we are restricted by state statute about what goes into our road and bridge. So that, has an effect on what we can and can't do as far as our funding, so that there is that as well. And then also, what about years that we have ARPA funding? That is a concern as well. So, just for your consideration, there's a lot that goes into that and into that consideration.
Thank you. So from a way ahead point of view, let's discuss that for a moment. Here's what I think. We have these 16 items. As I recall, number 4, 15, and 16 are the ones that the CAC and the staff disagree with, and but the other ones, the other 13, seems to be agreement. what I would think for a way ahead, let's discuss this, is at our next meeting, we do two things. One, we start voting. Do we want to vote on the individual ones, number one, number two, number three? Or do we want to vote as a group on the ones that the CAC and the staff agree on? Do we want to vote as a block on that and move those to the side and then have further discussions on the ones where there's disagreement? So those are the discussion points I open up to the board members right now. Feel free to jump in there and online, of course.
Well, hearing no one else jumping in, I'm not afraid to.
You've heard my opinion.
So
Whatever.
I do think if staff can divide it for the next meeting and those, because there were a couple others that had a few discussion
Yes.
points as well. So the ones where there really wasn't much of a discussion point on, where you've got agreement from the CAC, the staff, and the general consensus from the board, I'd say do in one. And then let's do separate for each of the others. And the staff's been taking notes as we've gone through that, so. And then you always have the ability to divide a question if someone over the next month goes back to their town trustees and finds out, oh my gosh, this is a deal breaker for us. So
Right.
we can go back like that.
But I think we need to move forward.
Yep, I agree.
And I think that's a legitimate way to knock some of those. Go ahead, Cal.
And in that case, Mr. Chair, I would ask the board's permission that I take the 16 items which we've left in the order as previously presented to us to respond to and reorder them, but I still will leave all the content there and put them in basically the three categories, ones that staff and CAC are in agreement on, ones there's some agreed upon, but there was some further discussion, and then three, the ones that require, they have the disagreement that requires some additional directions. That's acceptable.
So approved.
Perfect.
And since I always like to be the legal wet blanket, I just want to make the point that some of these are really direction to staff and or consultants like me, your legal counsel, to bring recommendations back to the board, specifically for the ballot question. As we were talking about at the lunch meeting today, and some of you will recall from the last ballot effort, there was a number of decision points that got us to that ballot question that this board should consider as well. And then these other issues are sort of jumping off of, assuming we're starting with that ballot question, but that's a larger conversation I really need to have with this board before we get to that point. So.
And on the further blanket side of things, these are directions as we get ready to prepare ballot language for next summer. So there's certainly time for us to go back and revisit things, but staff needs directions to what to start preparing and what
Yes,
to
they
start
do.
doing.
Yes.
But none of them are set in stone until we actually put this item on the ballot. So.
Thank you. With that said, yes, Jim.
Real quick, I should have said this in the beginning. And I think I overlooked it. This was a useful conversation from the CAC's perspective. We came away from this much more informed in a lot of cases, which I think helps us do what you want us to do, and that is address these issues. And I thought it was a very healthy discussion, especially for some of the newer members of our CAC that haven't been involved in a while. So while it was laborious at times, it was also, I think, a very good discussion for the CAC. So just wanted to not say that.
And please, at least from my point of view, please send my thanks to the CAC for giving us this kind of discussion points.
Yeah, from all of our point of view. Yeah.
Am I hearing that the board does want a closed executive session for your August meeting?
According to yeah, she said yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. With that said, yes, go ahead, Rick.
And normally we've been putting those at the end since we have to clear the building or clear the room of folks that are not eligible to be in the executive session. So at the end of the meeting then?
That's correct. All right, so hey, we're going to be able to move on to item 8, Charlie. Let's see.
These are just essentially by exception, right? We can go through these relatively quickly.
Yes, what you have in your packet is the City of Colorado Springs has presented a task order log. We did not have capital change orders or maintenance change orders for this past month. And then you also have the real estate log that was prepared from January through May. I apologize, we had not presented that to you in the past, and we will get that up to you in a monthly basis moving forward. But this is provided for your information. I am available for questions.
All right, I'll open it up for questions. Online, any questions? Okay, we'll move along to 8 Delta. El Paso County monthly order change.
Jennifer Irvin, El Paso County, you have what's presented in the packet. It's informational. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions to include online? Okay, we'll move along to item 9 Alpha.
Great. This is CDOT's proposed rulemaking on the pollution reduction planning. This is part of House Bill or 260 that passed Section 30 requirements that we've talked about at a couple of the meetings. So the good news is things are starting to move forward. There was a meeting that started today at 2:30, and I think the second part of it is tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. CDOT's holding. It's anticipated that at one of these meetings, they're going to authorize that the rulemaking is going to get started. The good news is that from the materials that we pulled from their meeting information, and I think Rick distributed to all of you either this morning or last night, is that it looks like CDOT is going to place the rulemaking in the Transportation Commission as opposed to the Air Quality Control Commission. So that is a positive for us. We anticipate it to be a positive. The proposed timeline that was in the meeting materials for these 2 meetings that are happening today and tomorrow shows that the notice of rulemaking, which usually includes a draft of the rules and the scope and allows for public comment, that would be July 30th. That the rulemaking hearing, which would include a portion where public can comment, would be August 30th and 31st. They anticipate rule adoption around September 16th and a rule effective date of November 14th. They have identified as one of the areas that needs clarity what a regionally significant project is, because that was not defined in the bill. The other thing I wanted to mention was that the board had previously authorized us to sign up for party status. As currently suggested in the materials we pulled down, they're considering this friendly rulemaking. I don't know what that means exactly, but it indicated in the materials that might not include party status. So we're watching that. And if there's an ability to sign up, obviously we will be, and we'll keep you briefed since things are moving rather quickly.
Thank you, Jennifer. Yes, Rick.
Question on the timetable. If you are going to be asking the board for comments to provide in the rulemaking hearing, what month do we need to be ready to do that?
We would need to do that next month because the rulemaking hearing is currently anticipated to be at the end of August. So we should have draft rules if they follow the timeline by the end of July that we can review, and this board could look at them next month and provide us with some direction for comments.
Keep this same topic on the agenda for next month.
Yep.
Okay. All right.
I should note that someone from my office is attending those meetings today, so I will know what happened at the meetings, even though I'm here and can't possibly
Very
be in
good.
2 places.
I don't know. Why not?
Pretty good. Not that good.
Hey, we're up to staff field review reports.
Just an information item showing the results of my quarterly drive around to confirm what the member governments say they completed in the quarter.
Is that it? All right, great. Thank you. So we're moving to item number 10, PPRTA member announcements. I'll go around the room and start with Commissioner Geithner.
I have no announcements.
And I see Commissioner Gonzalez shaking his no. Mayor.
We're going to have our Rama Days, the second Saturday in August. You're all welcome to come out. There's a tractor pull, pulled pork sandwiches. It's just a good day to visit with everybody and live your political views, just come and enjoy the day. There's horseshoe throwing and a lot of good stuff, and it's all free.
Second Saturday in
Yeah,
August.
Second Saturday in August.
All
It's
right.
that way every year. That way we don't have to change any banners or anything that we have.
Yeah.
Whatever the
Hey.
day is, that's the week.
I like that.
Yeah.
And what time does it start?
It starts at, I think it starts at 9, the parade does, and then it just goes through the day. I'll have a pancake breakfast. The church out there is gonna put it on, and you can come and get a pancake breakfast.
I think I might be there.
There
All
you go.
right. Yes, council member.
So
Williams.
July 31st, 1871, the city of Colorado Springs was founded. And so there are throughout this month a number of sesquicentennial related events, which is 150 years for those who didn't do the math quickly in your head. The largest of which is a wonderful street event that will take place between the Olympic Museum and Pioneers Museum on the 31st. And there'll be fun, excitement, and perhaps a screen or two to watch some of the Olympics as things are going on at the same time. So encourage everyone to join our sesquicentennial and perhaps the last day to see some of us with facial hair.
Yes, I can guarantee that.
That's what beard is about now.
Thank you. Okay, let's go to online. I see Mayor Graham is still up.
Really have nothing too much to report. We have various little festivals going on, but nothing major. We didn't want to interfere with Colorado Springs celebration. So I wish them well and a happy time. Hope to see them down there.
Yes, and it was great doing the opening of the cog rail and the ride up to Pikes Peak. That was good.
That was a lot of fun. Yeah,
It was.
very good.
Okay, who else online? I'm looking to see who's still. Yep.
Well, I was just saying, on August 2nd, I'm still selling tickets for anyone who wants a straight edge whack at Wayne's face. I've heard he might not show up at the event.
That sounds intriguing. I will reach out. Anyone up on the table anymore? Jennifer.
Just one item, my awesome staff got back to me and our push buttons, our new push buttons with the signal do have the voice function. And I did let Councilwoman Avila know before she left. They will have the street names and the weight and crosswalk is on voice messages. So I would also mention along with our NACO award, the West Colorado Avenue project over the time that we've had COVID actually won a total of 3 awards, one being the NACO, one being through APWA and one through ACEC. So that's a great tribute to the entire team, not just the county, but the entire project team and PPRTA. Thank you.
Thank you. For my, go ahead, Rick.
I have some contracts for the chair to sign.
Okay. So happy to do that. My comments are, I think this is a really good working group and to get through these items. I know like was said, we're more than a year out, obviously, from the election for this. So, but we do want to stay on track and get these things done. And I think we've got a good plan to do that. So, yes.
Apologize, Mr. Chair. I have three things I'd like to pass on. As you recall, the city applied for an INFA grant to help support construction of the South Academy project from Fountain to Milton Proby Parkway. Unfortunately, the city was not successful obtaining that grant. We know we were at the end stages because we were getting questions from the US DOT, but we were not selected. We did proceed with submitting the RAISE grant application for the railroad bridges that go over Fontanero Street and the amount of $18.2 million. So hopefully we're successful with that and help contribute and leverage RTA funding to to finish that project. And the last thing I'll mention, if you're curious, there is going to be a public meeting for the South Academy project from Bijou to Airport Road on Thursday, July 22nd at 5 p.m. if you're interested. And if you need that further information, I'd be happy to send that to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Gail. Well, okay, with that said, I call for a motion to adjourn. I hear a motion and a second. All in favor, state aye. Aye. All opposed, say no. I hear none. We are adjourned.